Trust no one. I'm alive. An anonymous phone call tears through the silence of a fresh grave. Moments ago, Munira, a young black freelance journalist, watched as her brother, Malik, was lowered into the earth. Malik was the kind of man who double-checked everything and protected his own. Now Evelyn, his poised, unblinking wife, is running a brisk funeral, sealing records, waving off questions, urging everyone to move on. The death certificate is signed. The paperwork looks clean. Yet the details refuse to align. A ceremony rushed, money shifting in the shadows, a doorbell video no one wants Munira to see. What exactly was that anonymous call warning her about? Who stands to profit from Malik's death? And how far will they go to bury the truth with him? Before we begin, subscribe to get our newest true crime stories and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Stay to the end. There's a twist you won't see coming. The wind worried the cypress tops while mourners formed a cold crescent around open earth, and Munira stood at the edge with her hands locked inside her coat because warmth felt like permission to relax. She couldn't relax. Not with a polished eulogy slipping over Malik like a veneer. Not with strangers reciting virtues the pastor had memorized yesterday. Dirt clung to the shovel clung to the silence, and she watched the lid descend on webbing as her breath turned to pale smoke. Malik had been the steady one, the brother who double-checked stoves and bank alerts, who called every Sunday, no matter how late his shift ran. Evelyn, poised, unblinking, spoke to the director with the tone of someone who schedules outcomes, not feelings. Forms, authorizations, release. Marcus lingered behind her with a jittery grin that never reached his eyes, smoothing a tie as if cloth could calm nerves, as if a wrinkle could explain tremors. When the final prayer ended, Evelyn leaned close and said too gently that they were ready to close, and people needed to go, and the sentence felt like a broom sweeping grief off the path. The in-law row gave Munira a string of polite looks that said, "Guest, not kin." A woman in a small hat whispered behind a glove, and fabric made judgment sound like pity. The world kept moving. An engine downshifted, a crow heckled a branch, while Munira told herself to wait, to watch, to notice seams where a story strains. Malik had taught her that, look at the small thing and follow what tugs. Her phone hummed once like a pin through fabric, and she checked the screen because reflex beats etiquette when you live by alerts. The number was unknown. The voice was Malik's cadence, calm and precise, and it said, "I'm alive, Munira. Trust no one." Then the call went dead and left a taste like metal behind her tongue. She didn't gasp, and she didn't stagger. She gripped the rail at the plot's foot and scanned faces for recognition, and found only rehearsed sympathy. Evelyn thanked the pastor with a professional smile, and when Munira stepped under the tent to ask for the medical file, Evelyn tilted her head and said the hospital had spoken to them and everything was handled, which sounded like another lock turning. Marcus added a soft scrape of laughter and murmured, "Not to overthink," and Munira filed the phrase because it is the kind of line men use when they want a woman to go quiet. The worker tightened the strap, and the coffin slid, and Munira's stomach tightened with it. Malik never shrugged at loose hinges or missed a safety check, and death by mishap didn't fit the handwriting etched into his days. The church hall smelled of punch and funeral ham. Conversations thinned when she entered because people prefer sorrow that doesn't argue back. Kayla, freelance photographer, friend, squeezed Munira's arm and whispered. The in-law side had locked the family chat, then rolled her eyes toward the corner where Evelyn conferred with a clerk as if grief required a conference table. The editor, who sometimes assigned Munira neighborhood stories, texted a condolences emoji and then, "Take time, don't chase," which read like a command not to be herself. Munira typed, "Not chasing, verifying," and slid the phone away. The unknown number pinged again. Don't confront, and she hated being managed, yet the cadence sounded like Malik building a safety net out of verbs, so she listened and counted exits. When she asked a deacon for the hospital chaplain's name, he cleared his throat and said things were sensitive, and she thanked him anyway because some doors open with leverage and some with patience. Kayla mentioned a neighbor with a doorbell camera on Malik's block, then glanced at Evelyn's posture. Security glass, so Munira marked the lead and the resistance in the same stroke. Outside, the cold tasted clean. She called the precinct and introduced herself by full name and occupation because labels sometimes open scripts. The officer routed her to voicemail and suggested a request in writing, which is how institutions say no without saying no. The unknown number buzzed again with a timestamp and nothing else, and Munira read the silence like a hand signal. Move but don't run. Ask but don't accuse. Marcus appeared at the curb with a too-warm smile and a paper cup, said he hoped she was coping, and offered caffeine as consolation, and she accepted the heat, not the drink, because Malik taught her that generosity comes with strings. Evelyn joined him with a thick folder and observed that logistics were handled, that the rest would help. Munira thanked her with softness that hid a ledger. She texted Kayla to pull county records for policy changes under Malik's name and to search for any recent filings by an LLC tied to Marcus. Kayla replied with a thumbs up and a curse emoji that bled off pressure. Back at her apartment, she lay out what she trusted: notebook, phone, a small evidence envelope. The tiny USB Malik had slid across a cafe table the week before. "Hold this for me," and deflected with a joke. Ritual steadied her hands. She washed them, opened a fresh page, wrote a headline she would never publish. Sequence of events. She didn't list. She narrated, because the story clarifies. Malik went quiet about money. Evelyn grew brisk about process. Marcus buzzed like a wire. The funeral ran like a schedule, not a farewell. A voice with Malik's cadence used an imperative he never wasted. A silver USB waited like a key. She stared at the skyline strip beyond the glass and let the building tremble through the floor. Then she whispered a sentence she meant to live by and no one else would own. Find the seam and pull. She plugged in the USB. Folders appeared, neat as drawers in a careful mind. A retainer with a private investigator. Malik's signature unshaken, a clause circling Munira as sole contact if he died or was incapacitated. PDFs of rewritten insurance, screenshots of transfers to a mailbox company, a short video where Malik spoke softly about coffee that tasted sweet when it shouldn't, and paperwork that made his skin itch. And he said, if this message reached her without his call, assume someone else decided for him. A checksum list sat beneath like a promise of integrity. She called the hospital switchboard for admission times and attending names, got a polite bounce to voicemail, and wrote the questions anyway. At dusk, under fluorescent hum in the emergency bay, a night nurse described numbers like weather: bicarbonate low, anion gap high, osmolar gap off, then mentioned nothing about burns or blunt trauma. Munira thanked her without saying poison, and the nurse squeezed her hand like a door left ajar. Munira went home with the numbers in her pocket and a sense that the floor had tilted toward a truth she didn't want but would not refuse. The mailbox address led to a strip mall shop with P.O. boxes and a clock that ticked like a metronome for lies meant to sound routine. The clerk shrugged at privacy rules, yet didn't mind when Kayla photographed a handwritten board that listed renewals with initials matching the LLC. Outside, flyers skittered across asphalt, while Munira called Mr. Ortiz, the bike-fixing neighbor with the doorbell camera. He didn't want trouble, he said, but he also didn't want secrets, so he shared a clip where Marcus left a small white bag labeled vitamins on Malik's porch and walked away without knocking. Munira saved the file, wrote the timestamp, and felt the line snap taut between the purchase receipt on her screen and the visit on her phone. Her editor texted again. Grief distorts judgment. and she answered that judgment improves with facts, then muted the thread because noise steals hours faster than thieves steal money. A burner number flashed with 4 plain words: chain of custody matters, and when she demanded to know who had authority to instruct her, the reply showed a crop of Malik's retainer page and a card where only the last name, Callahan, remained. So she pulled a prepaid SIM from a drawer, because if a stranger used her brother's paperwork, compartment walls needed to be clean. Callahan wrote, "Do not confront, do not publish, build the sequence and hand it to people who can serve warrants." She hated waiting, yet recognized strategy, so she underlined the sequence in red and kept moving. That night, Evelyn invited her to talk in a house that smelled like linen candles and careful wealth. Tea steamed between them while Evelyn spoke about trauma-twisting memory and policies protecting dignity, and Munira watched hands, not face, because fingers betray what posture hides. Marcus leaned in a doorway with citrus cologne and said families should protect each other from drama. Mr. Tate joined by speakerphone to explain defamation and suggest a voluntary evaluation to ensure Munira was fit to decide, and the soft language felt like a velvet rope across an exit. Munira kept her voice tethered to dates when she asked who authorized the rider 3 months ago and why premium emails carried Marcus's address. She laid a hardware store invoice on the table like an afterthought and mentioned a doorbell camera in the same breath as a grocery list. Marcus laughed too quickly and said additives were normal and some people couldn't handle changes in their diet, then added misunderstandings should stay in-house. It wasn't a denial so much as a wish. When she asked for the attending physician's name, Evelyn said she didn't have it on her, and the empty box rang. Munira left with a recording pinned under her collar and a tail that tried to stay discreet. 3 turns and a sudden stop shook it loose. The burner pinged mid-drive. Drop copies at the locker on 3rd. Keep originals sealed. Sign across tape. So she fed a 24-hour shipping shop with what she had, while her pulse kept time with the copier. In a cramped office above a pharmacy, Dr. Chen read the night nurse numbers as if they were contour lines on a map and said the pattern didn't sing trauma. It hummed solvent, and if vision blurred first or confusion came early, methanol belonged in the sentence. Attorneys, the toxicologist added, need timeline, purchase proof, delivery image, lab pattern, and a clean handoff. Midnight found Munira at her kitchen table, sealing the USB in a fresh bag and photographing it beside a clock. She appended the porch clip, wire screenshots, and a memo that described Evelyn's gentleness as a tool, not a feeling, then sent Callahan a single acknowledgement and slept for 3 hours like someone who had placed a weight correctly. Dawn bruised the skyline when Munira walked into the municipal building with an envelope and breath steady. The DA intake clerk logged items while an evidence tech stamped the checksum sheet, each thump sounding like a gavel on a paper. Assistant DA Reyes listened with the patience of a surgeon and said, "Triggers matter because they mark intent." Munira described the call that wasn't a call so much as a dead man's switch, the USB that was a map, the numbers a nurse read like weather, and a family narrative that ran past questions. Reyes said they would seek warrants. Then she asked Munira not to publish until subpoenas landed, and Munira agreed, because sometimes patience is power that law can use. The counterpunch came online by afternoon, a post calling her unstable, a thread suggesting she wanted money, a comment that tried to turn ambitious into an insult. Tate emailed a silk-couched letter urging a wellness screening she had not requested. Munira replied with a sentence citing her physician and schedule, then attached the intake receipt for no one in particular. Kayla texted a hardware invoice shot that matched the doorbell timestamp, and the lid snapped tight. The burner buzzed once. Good handoff, stay dark, warrants in motion, and Munira stood at her window through one green light of ordinary city and let buses hiss and a child drag a dog across a crosswalk, because normal is a resource you ration when storms circle. She wrote a single line in her notebook, underlined once, and set the pen down. No one edits me out of my own life. Fluorescence hummed in a DA conference room that smelled like toner and old coffee. The evidence tech photographed the bag Munira had signed across the seam and spun a locker dial that clicked like a promise. Reyes walked through probable cause, money braided to a mailbox, a vitamin bag delivered on the eve of collapse, labs that whispered solvent, and asked whether Munira could hold a controlled conversation to freeze dates in Marcus's own mouth while warrants moved. Callahan slipped in with rain on his coat and no appetite for drama, and he explained why he'd stayed hidden. Source protection, timing, the habit of living long enough to file the next report. Munira nodded because fear is permitted and delay is not. The chosen talk house had hotel soft light and carpet that swallowed footfall. Munira arrived early, tested the pen mic, and memorized where water glasses sat. Evelyn entered with a folder hugged to her ribs and a voice tuned to measured empathy, and she said, "Trauma distorts timing and policy protects dignity." Marcus followed with a smile that asked for trust before facts. Tate's voice bled from a phone and repeated defamation, wellness check, caution. Munira kept her questions tethered to documents as she asked who authorized the rider and why premium emails bore Marcus's address. She slid the hardware invoice close enough to cast a shadow, mentioned a doorbell camera, as if it were weather, and watched Marcus laugh too fast about additives and keeping misunderstandings in-house. When she requested the attending physician's name, Evelyn said she didn't have it. Coffee cooled, script ran dry, and Munira thanked them for managing so much while the tape warmed against her skin. In the car, she texted Reyes a code phrase for a clean capture. Words like additives and in-house and the absence of a name make good hinges. Pre-dawn ironed the city flat before it admitted blue. Unmarked sedans slid into position outside Evelyn's brick townhouse while windbreakers with block letters waited for a radio's 3 clicks. Munira watched from half a block and didn't want spectacle, only confirmation. The foyer swallowed boots, rooms exhaled secrets, bottles in a basement cabinet, a solvent guide with a torn dosage page, a ledger cut deep by a hand that pressed too hard. A second team hit Marcus's apartment. A bedroom window budged 3 inches, and a firm command shut it. "One in custody," the radio said, and Munira let her jaw unlock without smiling, because triumph is a poor editor. Evelyn emerged pale and porcelain rigid, the folder that once held composure now clutched like a shield. Fear had finally stripped posture down to person. Callahan texted evidence logged, counsel present. Reyes phoned instructions. Stay off the record. Wait for subpoenas. Let paper do the next hard thing. Marcus walked past the curb with the jaw of a gambler whose borrowed luck just came due. He hissed the word family at no one. Back at the DA's office, the lab expedited swabs while Tex photographed a yellow cap that matched the store's stock sheet. Financial crimes traced wires through 2 banks into the mailbox company with a neat arc that begged one question: why hide honest transactions? Reyes outlined the next steps. Charges drafted. Evelyn approached for cooperation. Marcus held for arraignment, while a clerk documented the chain of custody for the recording, because defense attorneys love to accuse the sound of being air. Munira asked why Evelyn cracked now when she'd held in a cushioned room. Reyes said paper and patience can do what shame wants, but cannot manage alone. Callahan finally took a breath and told Munira staying anonymous had never been about doubting her courage. It was about outlasting doubt's clock. On the way out, Tate's office sent a new letter about concerning behavior online, and Munira replied with measured commas. The intake receipt attached again, then closed a perfect bomb of a draft she would not detonate because she'd promised chain of custody, not catharsis on demand. She thanked Kayla for the invoice image that clicked the porch video into place. She dropped an anonymous commendation for the night nurse because kindness deserves its own record. She texted Ortiz that the DA might come for the clip, and he sent a thumbs up and a bike emoji that made her throat sting. The burner buzzed one last time that day. Hold position, wait for lab final, almost there. And Munira stood at the window and said aloud what the glass could bear. She would not be edited out. The corridor outside the lab felt like a throat-holding breath. Rain-stitched windows while the clock insisted on progress. Reyes stepped through with Callahan and Dr. Chen, and fluorescence sharpened as she said the words that pulled the floor into place. Toxicology was final, methanol was lethal, the pattern matched the nurse's quiet map, and the narrative of the accident was over. Photos showed the seized container's yellow cap matching the hardware sheet. Ledgers from Marcus's desk braided transfers to the mailbox company with a neatness only fear could love. Evelyn sat 2 chairs down, fingers locked pale, and she whispered that she would cooperate if her mother and job were spared. She stared at a blank wall as if it could defend decisions made in rooms scented like linen. Callahan explained the dead man's switch. An automated alert triggered when Malik failed to enter a daily code after a hospital admission pinged the service, and he produced retention logs to keep defense from calling the call a ghost. Reyes scheduled a press conference and asked Munira to stand behind the podium but not at the microphone. Her presence can speak without sound. The cage door clanged as the evidence bag went back inside, and the note felt like permission to exhale. Stairs to the rotunda filled with cameras and umbrellas, and a storm of voices as the city seal glowed like a coin turned to face. When Reyes announced second-degree murder tied to financial fraud, the air cut to clarity. A reporter asked about the anonymous call. Reyes described the automated alert and the pre-recorded warning to the designated contact, and the line landed like a fire plan read before the smoke. In a side room, Evelyn signed a proffer letter with only one wobble of pen. Pity and anger shared a chair in Munira's chest because collaboration doesn't erase damage and remorse doesn't rebuild trust. The arraignment felt like theater with a ban on applause. Marcus wore a suit like a dare, while a clerk read the complaint with rainless dryness, his attorney gestured at grief and online vitriol, and the judge kept a flat gaze as the DA described the porch delivery without adjectives. Outside, microphones waited like crows on a wire. Munira said one sentence, "Let the evidence speak," and stepped back, because restraint was a power she had earned by refusing the easy headline. In the elevator, messages lifted the old room of her life into a larger house. Former sources offering documents, an editor apologizing for telling her to stand down, Dr. Chen writing glad the data had a place to land, and something unclenched without permission. At home, Munira opened the draft she had starved of publication until the city had spoken, then laid final pieces the state had made public. Dates like anchors, methanol explained in plain talk, the porch clip credited to Ortiz and the DA in equal type, the dead man's switch described as a last kindness from a meticulous brother who prepared for the worst without inviting it. Before publishing, she added a photo of the checksum page she'd signed weeks before and typed a note about keeping stories honest, then clicked. Smear posts didn't stop, yet they softened when names and numbers stood in their path. She didn't answer because she had already spoken in the only place that mattered. Tate released an artful sentence designed to bruise without marks. Munira let it pass because sorrow doesn't need a podium. Kayla messaged a heart and a camera and said comments were full of women told to be reasonable. Munira laughed without joy because recognition hurts and helps at once. Callahan texted, "Thanks for treating evidence like oxygen." She wrote back, "Oxygen belongs to everyone who breathes," then stood very still until the room stopped vibrating. Dusk gathered in the churchyard where it began. Neighbors held votives that turned the air into a low galaxy, and Munira joined with a candle because ritual serves those who serve it. The choir hummed steadily, ground after long water. Ortiz filmed hands instead of faces, because grief often lives where light meets skin. Kayla passed matches like a librarian for flame. Across the steps, Evelyn looked smaller than her posture allowed. When their eyes met, there was no forgiveness, only acknowledgement that facts had moved the world, and both would live with what those facts revealed. Munira stepped to a small microphone, not because she wanted to, but because people needed a bridge, and she said, "Blood is not a license." Then set the candle down, and let silence finish what sound began. At the community center, folding tables held sign-up sheets and a restless coffee urn. Munira announced the Malik Foundation, small grants for families navigating medical records and legal forms, a vetted directory of experts, a hotline that picks up when institutions don't, and watched lines fill as if ink had decided to be loyal. Her editor arrived with a printed apology and a thin envelope of donation that looked smaller than regret. Munira accepted both without ceremony, because the point wasn't penance, it was practice, and practice means doing the next right thing faster than you did the last. Back home, the city had traded rain for a salt-bright night. As she unlocked her door, her phone chimed with a thank you from a town she'd never visited. Then another, until the thread looked like a map of places where people had been told no and decided to learn the language of yes. She laid the phone on the table and pressed both palms to the wood, laughing once because sound needs room after rooms full of facts. The receipt for the evidence bag stayed in her top drawer, her article pinned to the top of her site. Malik's name settled inside her, not as a wound, but as a stake, a point you tie a line to when the weather turns. The room lost its echo and found its shape. Outside, sirens braided with traffic and then thinned. Inside, the promise she made on burial day held. Find the seam and pull, then keep pulling until truth stands on its own legs. Thank you for spending this time with Munira's story. If it spoke to you, tell us what moment hit hardest, or what detail you would have followed first. Do you think the dead man's switch changed everything? Or was there another red flag you saw earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Your perspectives help shape what we investigate next. If you want more true crime narratives anchored in evidence and courage, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and pass this episode to someone who might need it. Your support lets us keep telling stories that put truth on the record. See you at the next one.